Data is the new oil. It's so valuable nowadays. Email is one of the easiest ways as an attacker for me to get to the employee of the business.
What's going to happen in the next 6 months?
Within the security world, the geopolitical environment actually generates challenges. ChatGPT and the likes, they can be used to draft an email better than I can read and write myself.
We welcome Stephen Peake, Director Solution Architects, UK and Ireland from Barracuda. Stephen has worked in IT for over 18 years, 10 of which have been in senior IT management, delivering support, infrastructure and security services for a UK-wide group of companies, performing outsourced services to the legal and insurance sectors and the NHS. Stephen heads a team of engineers within the UK and is responsible for engaging with end users and partners to deliver solutions to solve the business and security and data protection needs. Stephen, thank you so much for popping in today.
Thank you for having me.
I want to just dive straight in. Can you just tell me a little bit about what you do and the company that you work for and what you specialise in?
Yeah, sure. So I currently work for a company called Barracuda Networks, as you so eloquently introduced there. So our organisation creates and supplies security software and services to businesses of all different shapes and sizes. So that might be a startup organisation who are really trying to gain traction in a new market, but they still need security and to protect their data and their services they are supplying. It could be right the way up to an enterprise-based organisation who have complex teams, complex challenges within the security sector, and ultimately Barracuda are aiming to deliver services around that and help those organisations. Myself, on a day-to-day, I run a team and also engage directly with those customers to really understand their challenges, understand their business requirements as they're trying to work their way through the huge, ginormous landscape of cybersecurity as it is today, and ultimately enable them to work out what they could do to protect themselves. And that could be protecting bad elements of the world getting into their organisation. It may well actually be protecting their data and what they're storing in their environments as well, and anything in between.
Right. Well, I was going to ask, what are some of these challenges that companies are facing? But you mentioned, the kind of the data and bad kind of infiltrators. What are you seeing from your kind of in your position in the industry that some of these companies are facing?
So companies typically have a number of areas that they have challenges. So we all have a way to communicate. Okay, so when we look at communication, the top threat vector for any organization today, no matter which research you go and look at, typically is email, and sort of looking at that email security landscape. Now, the challenge and the reason for that is email is one of the easiest ways as an attacker for me to get to the employee of the business. And we'll no doubt talk a little bit about what that means to organizations a little bit later. I think the other aspect of it is most businesses today have an online presence. And so with an online presence, yes, social media, etc. So they have to be mindful about how their image looks. Okay, so that's an awareness, if you like, and that can influence security, the type of information they share online, etc. But also you have to think about the likes of their websites that they publish, the applications that they have on your mobile phone. How do you make sure that the data going in and out of them is valid, correct? How do you make sure the databases that sit behind those systems can't be infiltrated and the information that is valuable is extracted out? One of my colleagues used to say, data is the new oil, because actually it's so valuable nowadays, and that's ultimately what attackers are trying to achieve. So we have businesses that have ultimately multiple ways to be attacked, approached, and ultimately what we're aiming to do is try and stop any of that. And I say try because actually it is more of a when rather than if for business nowadays. Right. It's a moving landscape. It's a bit of a cat and mouse, Tom and Jerry type of scenario. The attackers are always evolving. Businesses who, like ourselves, who are trying to secure and help organizations are having to continually evolve with that as well.
So, in a number of conversations I've had today, AI keeps on cropping up and it's having an impact. But I want to couple that with email. You mentioned email.
Yes.
Now, I consider myself quite savvy in this space, but I received an email from what I thought was a senior leader who I work with every day, and the tone, the way it was delivered, everything, and I was busy at the time, so I just glanced at it, I read it, and it just sounded like he was talking to me. So I thought, well, okay, I'll respond. That was a test from our security team here, and which has resulted in me having to do more training. But it was so sophisticated that I actually thought it was him, because even the temperament and the speed at which the words were kind of sounding to me. What role is AI playing in that?
Yeah, so there's a couple of points in there. It's a big package to unpack there. I think, first of all, it's amazing that the organisation's running awareness campaigns, because awareness of individuals within an organisation is one of the key aspects of a security posture. Okay, if you have no awareness, it doesn't matter how much AI, how much technology we use. If something ultimately gets through those protection methods, that awareness is that last sort of safety net. Now, you mentioned there about you were in a rush, right? Everyone's lives is busy. Everyone is looking at email on multiple devices nowadays. They're not necessarily consuming the context of the email if as full as we may be used to when it was, we'll read it at our desk. So now we've got noise, we've got background noise in our environment that is ultimately making us not assess an email in maybe the same way. Now, introduce artificial intelligence, large language models, methods of ultimately taking text and educating a technology, letting that technology digest that information, and then the value of large language models, such as, everyone's aware of ChatGPT. If we look at when ChatGPT launched, we've seen a multi-million volume increase of what we would class as impersonation email. And that's exactly what you've just referenced there, impersonation email. Right. So why is that? If we think about large language models, what they are is a technology that can learn, but they learn from text. So ultimately, we feed it information. That information is analysed, understood, and then that is used to reproduce a summarised version of maybe information. We then have the ability to interact with that information, so it appears like it has a memory. So we can ask it one question and then ask it to manipulate its results into another format, as an example. Now, all of that means, from an attacker's perspective, I can go and use that type of model and actually generate email in a very structured way, with the right context, with the right urgency, and ultimately generate that perfectly looking email. And if we come back to that awareness point where we started, what we usually or used to tell organizations is, on your awareness training, tell individuals to look for grammatical errors. Tell individuals to check where it comes from. Tell individuals to look at whether there's different text characters in there. Well, actually, large language models, ChatGPT and the likes, there's lots out there now, they can be used to draft an email better than I can read and write myself, which to give you context. That then makes it really difficult for the employee of an organisation to really identify if something is valid or not. Hence, add that noise, add that background of challenge and busyness. It's very easy to fall through the net and ultimately fall for an email of that type. They do typically have common traits. So if you look at the impersonation type of example, they typically impersonate what we would class as a VIP. So that's typically C-level type of organisation in an organisation.
Even though people are going to react to a senior leader saying,
senior leader, yes, exactly. Use that leadership type of role. They will look at also people in organisations that have potential ways of authorizing payments and things like this. Think about actually what their aim is to gain reward at the end of the day. So they'll use that aspect. But then when we look at the actual mails themselves and the context of the mail, well, what we can start picking up on is the likes of the urgency and the phrasing. They typically ask for an action to be carried out. They typically ask for some form of information. So a most recent one that I've seen is, hey, I'm in a meeting. Can you quickly respond to me with your number for WhatsApp? I need to send you some information, right? Now you read that, and I see that every day, and I look at it and go, how do people fall for this? But the reality is that busyness, that coming from that senior leadership or appearing to come from that senior leadership, employees without awareness ultimately do trigger. And even employees that are aware, because of that distraction, can ultimately end up falling for what would be an impersonation email.
That's fascinating, and you mentioned the fact that in the age, this in a completely digital universe that we live in terms of social media marketing, as a company needs to promote itself, we're always talking about share content, share information, share. So
that's what we're doing today, right?
Yeah. And so if the premise is, let's share as much content as we can, hadn't really quite thought about it in terms of, well, actually, what threats is this potentially placing on the organization? So at Barracuda, then, what are you, when you're dealing with your customers and your client base, what are you doing in terms of helping these organizations, first of all, understand, but then, what technologies are being used to implement?
I think from an understanding perspective, personally, I do a lot of conversations similar to what we're doing today. We do a lot of thought leadership in terms of trying to educate business leaders about the risks, about the challenges that they potentially have. If we then step that down to sort of the day-to-day, we're engaging usually at the technical or security level. So if we're in the SMB, SME world, that could be an infrastructure and IT and manager that is trying to wear multiple hats. They're trying to keep the lights on, so they're running their operational aspect. They're also trying to keep their organization secure.
So small, medium enterprises.
So small to medium enterprises. Yeah. If we went into the enterprise sort of space, the true enterprise, then you're at multiple levels. You've got analysts who are looking at data that's constantly being generated. You've got then senior leaders, etc. So it's a different type of discussion. The reality is the majority of the businesses today that are really struggling with this challenge are in that SME space. Okay. Because they are trying to deal with multiple caps. They're trying to be the best they can. Typically limited budget, limited resource, and all of that plays into a challenge. So how do we approach that? First of all, we look at how can we try and protect the organization? And that's where the technology typically steps in. So ideally, take the email example as an example. What we want to do is never allow anything into the organization in the first place, right? And we can educate customers on how we do that. One of our ways to do that is use AI. Right. Well, hang on, we've just been talking about AI as the attackers. Well, actually, one of the best ways to defend against AI-generated content is use AI to actually identify it. So what that allows us to do is, at scale, far more efficiently than we ever have, actually look at information coming into customers' environments and understand. So rather than, if I think about technology traditionally, it used to be based on signature. And what was a signature? It's a little bit like your fingerprint on your finger. It was always the same, and if you gave your fingerprint away, that same fingerprint would match, and ultimately it would come back to yourself. However, things evolved, right? And we had to move away from signatures. Then we became into what's known as heuristics, and we were able to start identifying common patterns. But again, that still required some base knowledge. Now, when we take that and now start looking at machine learning capability, so for me, the word AI or artificial intelligence, it's quite a umbrella term, right?
Absolutely.
AI is actually it's like when they brought cloud to the market. What is cloud? Cloud is infrastructure in somebody else's data center, and they look after it for you. So AI is very similar. It's that market term that allows people to, if you like, group a lot of technologies into one element to then make a decision and ultimately decide on an action. So we have multiple elements in AI. We've got our large language models. You're hearing about AI agents, so it's a new thing that's currently appearing today. And then we also have the likes of machine learning. And machine learning is all about identifying patterns. Now, the way we educate that machine is we give it a subset of data that is knowing bad, but we also give it a set of data of knowing good. And out of that, it builds its algorithms. And then from that, it builds out what we call a classifier. So if we bunch it all together, we can then classify information, classify an item based off what it has learned. The good thing about that is that can be continually learning and evolving. So that's where AI really starts to step up. If you think about how that example you gave me of an email, by changing one word, I change the fingerprint, because something changes in the email. However, if my engine, my classifier, can identify the urgency, it can identify where it's coming from, it can identify how that it's mimicking an individual, all of a sudden we have a lot of indicators of risk. And the risk of that email can build, and ultimately at some point you get a score that says this is bad, right? Just think about it, that's keeping it in very basic terms. It's a lot more complex under the hood.
I believe
a lot more complex. So yeah, it's really but that's all about protection. The other element that businesses struggle with is response and also visibility. So what we also try and talk to businesses about is, well, if something is missed, how do you respond to it? Now, typically response is complex. You're trying to find information, needle in a haystack. You've got the limited skill sets in the organisations, so they don't really necessarily understand where to start. So what we try and do is use technology to give organisations tools to help that response method. So security is about stopping, but security is also about responding. Okay, so we'll also try and give that capability, and it's always about being easy to use. So we don't want somebody having to try and think about coding when they've got their world on fire because something has happened. That's the worst time for someone to try and code something. They're not relaxed. They're under pressure. They've got their CEOs breathing down their neck because maybe the business is offline. So we want to make that easy. And then the last piece around visibility. I had somebody come to me not too long ago, actually, and unfortunately they had an email similar to yourself, a phishing email come through. It was slightly different in that it had a URL in it. Now that URL led off to a website that looked legitimate, very well crafted, and when they tried to play the audio file that it looked like it asked them to authorize their account. Okay. Now, when they authorized their Microsoft 365 account, what was actually happening was they'd been redirected to an alternate website that looked very similar to a 365 login page. Off the back of that, the attacker gained access. Now, that gave the challenge of two things. The attacker sat in the environment for a number of days, but also when the attacker did decide to use the account, they didn't actually cause too much harm, thankfully. But when they used the account, it caused email to flow out of their organization as though it was legitimate. Now that became a challenge for the business because they had no visibility. They couldn't understand how it had happened. They couldn't understand what had happened. Where was that, the spark that started the fire, if you like? So we helped the organization walk through that process. And what we identified is actually they were compromised for that user account 4 days before the account was actually used. The reason they didn't know this was lack of visibility. So we look at trying to use the likes of technology for that. One of the main areas that lots of businesses will be hearing about at the moment is XDR, managed XDR, open XDR, whichever.
So what is XDR?
Term. So XDR is extended detection and response.
Right.
Okay. Let's simplify that down from a marketing term.
Is this before the breach? Is this intended before a breach happens?
So the idea of a detection and response service is you've got the technology in place to try and stop, but at some point something will evade that technology. Right. The detection and response piece of the puzzle is, if something happens, how quickly can you detect that something has happened, and how easily and quickly can you respond to it?
Right.
So that's what XDR is all about. There's lots of terms in the market, lots of marketing terms. The security industry does not help businesses understand security.
And for a business owner, I mean, they're just bamboozled by all these terms and acronyms.
Exactly.
They just want something that protects them and fixes a problem.
Exactly this. There's so many acronyms out there. EDR, MDR, XDR. There's loads of them, and they all mean different things. So when I look at an XDR solution, what that actually means for business is taking information from the technology they have deployed in their organization. That may be their SaaS services, cloud services they're using. It may be their firewall that's protecting their internet access. It may be their servers they have on site that are serving files and shares and stuff to their employees. It's taking all that information and that log information and first of all collating it, because if it's not collated, it means nothing. Yeah, it's just information at that point. Where we then bring AI into this is, once we've collated that information and all that information is in one place, we can use AI and machine learning capabilities to start quickly assessing logs. That technology allows us to identify what we call an indicator of compromise, right? A piece of information that says an organization may have an issue here. AI revolutionized how you do that, because the speed at which you can now do that is seconds rather than minutes or hours. You can do it at scale, right? And then off the back of that, if you do detect an indicator of compromise, well, how do we respond to it? What else could we do? So in that email example as I gave you, that organization, they had no visibility that something was going on, but they also had no response until the fire was raging. Whereas with a visibility, that response could happen in seconds. That means that fire never actually starts. The spark happens because something has got through the system, but ultimately they can mitigate it. Now, one of the examples there, to sort of finish that example off, a way to do that would be disable the user account. Right. Identify the indication of compromise, disable the user account. Well, it's no use to that attacker. That is, if you like, a quarantine. You've stopped the attack from moving forward. You still have a remediation process, and that's where that visibility still remains in your, if you like, post-incident analysis.
It's like a war in war games, right? Things that we used to watch on TV or films is actually, well, obviously now things are streamed and hardly anyone watches TV, but the reality is we're of a certain age. But in terms of, this whole, and rightly so, the focus on security now. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about, and you wonderfully explained how the role of the intersection of AI and cybersecurity. Yeah. What does that mean in terms of skills and development and training? Because, we've got businesses that don't have an internal IT team. Mm-hmm. Well, obviously, the enterprises will have. But, what does that mean for an organization as well? So there's two-part question there.
Yeah, so I think, like you say, scales of organization will always factor into skill set. A lot of smaller organizations nowadays go and consume services from a managed service provider. That managed service provider ultimately commits to delivering a level of security for them. They'll wrap security services around. They'll typically have a team there who the individual can call, similar to XDR in terms of a technology typically has that service wrap around with it, that expertise of skill set to ultimately help that customer. In terms of how organizations are using AI today, one of the best references I can give you is how I see it used in my own environment right now. So a great example is Microsoft Copilot. Right? Microsoft launched Copilot a few months back now, and ultimately many businesses jumped on it straight away and found actually that was a big risk. And that was the fact they didn't have their data secured. So all of a sudden, there was a risk in the business that myself as an employee sat doing a bit of work, if their data was not secured, it also all of a sudden became very easy for me to go and find that payroll spreadsheet or that CEO document that had been written because it wasn't locked away properly, right? So you saw a little bit of a recoil back from business going, oh, this is risky. We need to think about this. They also had various different AI models come out, and DeepSeek, the Chinese model, would be the most relevant one right now. And businesses started to feed documents in about their sensitive information, and they would summarize this for me. And what a great way to be efficient.
Yeah.
Do you know, summarize this. But actually what they realized was they didn't know what was happening with that data afterwards. And then some of these organizations, that DeepSeek was in the news about the fact they had some of their algorithms and data visible to the internet. So it made businesses recoil a little bit from the AI sort of concept. The reality is that example of summarizing is a great example, right? If I think about when I have a meeting with a customer, I traditionally would have the meeting, I'd have my notebook in front of me, I'd sit and I'd write away and scribble my notes, and I'd be asking backwards and forwards questions, and the customer's doing the same. And we're half paying attention to each other because actually we're trying to make sure we get the data down so we can follow up with whatever actions. A part of that scribbling is our actions, right? Well, let's take Zoom or Teams as an example. They now summarize a meeting for you if you have it enabled. That summary summarizes the conversation. It would summarize, a little bit like we're having today, it would summarize what we spoke about. It would take out the key bullet points. It would also take out our actions and formally put them in a list for us. That all of a sudden just made me more attentive on my calls generally, but also my follow-up is more efficient, right? So what we're seeing with AI in business is not necessarily replacing staff, not necessarily replacing skill set. What it's actually doing right now for me is enhancing skill sets, enhancing efficiency. Another great example is in the development world. I'm not a great coder, right? I understand how it all works. I can read it. Ask me to build something from scratch. Oof. Yeah. Give me a foundation. Yeah. However, when we look at what the likes of Microsoft Visual Studio is doing today with Copilot, you can ask it to write you what you need, and it will give you a structure of code. Will that code be perfect? No. Does it still need that skilled individual to assess it, understand it, and manipulate it to what's exactly needed? Yes. But what that individual's not had to do is sit and write 20, 30, 40, 50 lines of code just to get to a point of saying, right, am I right? Right. So it's all about efficiency. And that applies in security as well, around awareness, around how for instance, banners on email again. So we'll stick on the email theme. Popping up banners so that people realize they've never received an email from an individual and stuff like this. That is all about keeping awareness and keeping businesses secure, but that's actually happening through very, very swift analysis of data. And a lot of that is through machine learning capability, which is part of that AI bubble.
You have been part of the industry for well over a decade, right? So, and it's
I'm getting old, yeah. I'm getting old.
Yeah, it's not. And you've seen this change and this shift in terms of how technology, the innovation. Mm-hmm. We mentioned cloud. Clients went from server under the desk to a data center, and now we're seeing AI being this, and whether it's ChatGPT, Claude, Otter AI. I mean, there's so many out there that can summarize or capture meeting notes. Not sponsored by any of them, but
we should say that, shouldn't we?
But in terms of like you say, the efficiencies are making us more. We are time poor, right? So as employees, we can be much more efficient. Do we need to have this mindset, or even these kind of almost like a mini policy in mind that kind of says, well, actually, from a compliance perspective, there's certain bits of information I want to give to a Gen AI tool, and some things that are just going to hold back.
Yeah, absolutely. Compliance is a huge subject, like huge. But AI definitely shone a light on the compliance and legal challenges of data, if you like. We've had plenty of scenarios where that's occurred in the past. We look at GDPR regulations being brought in for organizations who want to be in certain industries have to go and get certifications like of ISO 27001, even Cyber Essentials in the SME market. They shine spotlights on compliance and data, but they sort of shine it on it and then it flashes past, and once the tick box is there and the certification's there, it fades into the background and it drops off the CEO's table and all this type of stuff. What AI has done is brought that right back to the level of the exec level in the organization. And as an example from a Barracuda perspective, like we're a global company, so we're in a luxurious position where actually we've gone out and got our own version of some of these models, and we have an internal tool that helps me, for instance, find the information that I need to fill in a request for information document. Makes me more efficient, amazing, makes my team more efficient, but we know it's safe because we're not uploading any sort of content to a public service.
So in a controlled environment.
And that comes from that compliance drive. So you're right, absolutely, businesses today should be thinking about getting an AI policy in place. The type of information that you can consume in that service, the type of information you should not consume in that service. And the not is probably more relevant than the should, and I think also just being aware that, and this applies to any SaaS service at all, to be honest, you are sharing information with a third party. You want to make sure, as you go through that purchase process, that you are ticking the boxes to say my data is safe, because that data is still yours. So as you're going through these services, like I say, whether it's to consume an AI bot, or whether it's to buy a security service, a database service, whichever it is, you need to be checking those boxes and making sure those compliance and regulatory pieces are in place. How's the data handled? Is it stored or is it deleted after process? What regulations and compliance does the actual service itself have? What does the business have? Because that's another bit of I found quite heavily when I was purchasing services, I would get businesses say, well, ISO 27001, but the scope was so narrow of what that actually meant. The wider business was not. Well, that meant, will they run into that same standard, or was it just that little piece of the puzzle? And it's important it spans out. So there's lots of challenges businesses see today, and for small to medium enterprise, again, it's typically somebody else putting a cap on, trying to make sure that meets it. Thankfully, you go to typical well-known brands, you go and talk to well-established services, a lot of the time you're going to be just supplied the information. There's a URL for our website here, there's a document we can give you here, and quite quickly you can tick through that. Where that becomes a challenge, and I think where we see it in the AI world, is lots of startups. And startups themselves are usually finding their feet in the whole compliance world.
We're in the fastest growing tech hub in Europe.
Exactly, yeah. Which is amazing, right?
Yeah. It's so exciting.
And innovation innovation and growth and new ideas come into the market all the time. DeepSeek, the great example, the speed they brought that to market was amazing, and it caused ripples across the globe. But actually then they got caught out from the compliance and security side. So sometimes there is that balance of wanting to get that idea, that concept out to the market so that customers can consume it and then benefit from it. But sometimes you do need to take that step back.
Because that impacts trust, right? So
absolutely.
From a branding, marketing perspective, you're spending all this money and effort to present perception of organization. But then on the flip side, it could impact your share price.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, trust is everything, right? If you've not got trust, you're not going to do business. You're not going to listen to someone's opinion. Hopefully people trust me today. Trust is a cornerstone of any business. Trust is a cornerstone of security. Ultimately, there's a new concept out. I say new. It's been out there for a while now of zero trust. Well, that's the security world saying actually don't naturally trust anybody. Put the barriers up and only trust the elements that you have control of. But yeah, absolutely. In terms of your brand, from a business perspective, if you lose that consumer trust, you lose that business to business trust, you're going to have a real tough time. So it's one of the areas that ultimately businesses need to pay focus on. And that trust can actually be in the form of security. Making sure they have the right systems in place, making sure their own systems can't be compromised. So we've talked about that whole purchasing someone else's system. What about yourself when you look internally? Like, look inwards a little bit. Could you, hand on heart, say you're doing everything you possibly can in the budget you have, the time that you have, to secure your own customers' data, as an example? And that is a question, as a security firm, we ask ourselves all the time. Are we doing as much as we possibly can to make sure that trust stays? Because in the example of the email and the compromised account, one of the big fallouts of that type of attack is typically it's suppliers and customers that are getting targeted from when that fire rages, right? Well, that damages trust. That then damages brand. Brand ultimately is your key aspect of in your marketing campaigns, etc. You lose your brand. Well, that's a real tough position to come back from. And there's lots in history that show brands vanishing, being consumed by other brands so that they can be renamed. Other brands just completely renaming themselves because that trust has been lost in that logo, that icon that they've built and spent so much time on.
I think what's really interesting is with the focus on security and cybersecurity is becoming so prevalent that actually it's becoming a badge of honor for organizations to be able to say, do you know what, you can trust us because we're using this tool, that's been certified, it's from a trusted source, and something that they can reassure their customer base, be the business to business or even consumer, that their data is safe in that environment. I mean, is this must be a really exciting time for you to be working in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, cybersecurity for business is huge, for business and consumer. It is continually evolving. It's continually evolving. It's continually growing. There's new challenges coming up constantly. Well, myself being, if you like, go back many years, that IT geek, that person who wanted to know how the nuts and bolts went together, those challenges are forever changing. And so it's always an exciting time. I think I think back, the other aspect of it right now is security is and should be on every board member's agenda. It should be a discussion point at every single meeting that is had. And I think an awful lot of organisations are at that point now. If I go back 10, 15 years, security was seen as a bit of an insurance policy. It was not a discussion at the senior table. There was always a challenge on getting budget for that. Now it's much more understood that if we are secure, we are more safe. The risk is lower. It's never zero. And ultimately, we're doing everything for our brand and our business to make sure that we can build that trust. I think that's a great place to be right now. So a small, medium enterprise watching, listening to this now, who is thinking, right, I do need to have this conversation. What can they do? What can they do? Can they call Stephen Peake? They can go call me if they like. I'm sure my number's probably on the internet. Obviously, so it'd be amazing to talk to any organisation that has listened to this, given me their time to listen to what advice we have. We would be willing to obviously have a conversation. We have tools to help organisations understand, for instance, if they have any risk in their email environment. We have ways we can can talk about different products and services that we offer. But ultimately, and I think this is a really key point, if we have a conversation and we're not the right technology or we can't solve the business's problem, then we will let them know. But what that business will still get from that conversation is hopefully some guidance, some further knowledge of the challenge they potentially have. And that will then allow them to go and further assess the security market, which we said earlier is a minefield right now. They can go and assess that market and understand very much, what options they have for the if you like, that fine-tuned challenge that they've got. But yeah, absolutely. Go see it's barracuda.com. Go see our website. Feel free to find me on LinkedIn, Stephen Peake. It's all there and available and public, and it'd be great to have.
We'll make sure that we put it in the chat function when we post this. One final question. So you've seen this rapid growth. You're seeing what's happening right now. Forget 12, 18 months. What's going to happen in the next 6 months?
Oh, the next 6 months, it's an interesting time at the moment. And, we always see within the security world, the geopolitical environment actually generates challenges. But actually, one of the more local aspects, we're coming up to the end of the tax year, right? We're going to start seeing businesses being targeted with, again, those phishing type of emails, which are going to be linked to the likes of HMRC.
Right.
Seasonal activity. Yeah. And so within the next 6 months, we're going to see seasonal activity happen. It's probably going to happen at a scale that we've never seen before because of the AI capabilities, the as-a-service models that these attacking organizations can consume. So my suspicion is actually businesses just need to be knuckle down on what they're doing. Make sure they're doing that awareness training. Make sure they have the technology in place. Identifying their risks. As an organization, if you don't know where your risks are, you don't know where to start. You don't know where you need to invest your money, right? Do the boring piece first. Go and identify your public interfaces. Go and identify where your data is held. Build out that understanding and identify and put a risk around it. That'll then help and inform the senior teams in organizations where they need to then start looking at investments and budget. That'll inform the IT and the security teams and whatnot where they need to spend some time. Right? Do the boring piece first, because as a techie, it always was. That's my biggest. If someone would say to me, what should I do in the next 6 months? If you don't already know, go and identify where your areas of risk are.
Yeah.
Because
that's so valuable.
It is, and it's only going to get. We're only going to see more and more of these phishing type of attacks, service impersonation, ransomware. We've not spoken about it today, but that is still growing and out there at the moment. You're going to see lots of marketing in the security sector about
you're
XDR.
Here. Just tell me about ransomware again. You're here. Right?
Do you know what so you're going to hear a lot of noise in the market about AI, about XDR, about all the various aspects. It all comes back to, do I have the risk? Do I carry a risk that needs these type of tools, these services to ultimately mitigate? That would be my top tip for an organisation in the next 6 months. Go and identify and understand what that is.
Some super tips there. Thank you very much. Stephen Peake, Director of Solution Architects at Barracuda. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been insightful and some really helpful ways that small, medium enterprises can help secure themselves, right, for the future.
Yeah, it's been fabulous. Thank you very much for having me on, and I really hope the audience have enjoyed our conversation.
No, well, I think we'll get you back for another conversation. We can go deep dive into ransomware and other topics. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you.